The message came at 3 a.m. No name, no number, just 4 words on my screen. We know where you are. I sat up in the dark, my heart slamming against my chest, and I listened, really listened, to the sounds of my house, the wind, the crickets outside, and then from the room down the hall, the soft breathing of my boys, my twins, my sons who look nothing like me and everything like a man I ran from 5 years ago. I pressed my hand to my mouth so I wouldn't scream, because here is what you have to understand. I did not run because I didn't love him. I ran because I did. I ran because the moment I saw those 2 tiny heartbeats flickering on that ultrasound screen in a cold clinic in Seoul, I knew that loving him had become the most dangerous thing I had ever done. And these boys, these beautiful, impossible boys, they were proof of it. I picked up my phone. I looked at that message again. 4 words. And I asked myself the same question I have been asking for 5 years. How do you protect your children from the man they came from? I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I was not naive. I was not young and reckless and blind. I was a 29-year-old professional woman with a degree, a career, a plan for my life. I had built something real in Seoul, not easily, not without sacrifice. But I had done it. I had climbed. I had earned my place at tables where people like me were rarely invited to sit. And I was proud of that. I was careful. And yet, I have spent 5 years trying to understand how a careful woman ends up running through an airport at midnight with no luggage and 2 unborn children and a terror so deep it lives in her bones. I have spent 5 years telling myself it was a mistake, that I should have seen it coming, that a woman with my education, my sense, my eyes wide open, she should have known better. But I didn't. Because when it is real, it doesn't feel like danger. It feels like finally being seen. I first saw Kang Hyun-woo at the Jong Foundation Gala, a charity event I had spent 3 months planning down to the last white orchid arrangement and the precise temperature of the champagne. It was my biggest contract since moving to Seoul. The venue was a converted palace space in Gangnam, all glass and low light and the kind of quiet that only exists when every person in the room has more money than they could ever spend in a single lifetime. My job that night was to be invisible, to manage, to solve problems before they became visible. That is what I did best. I was behind a column near the service corridor, speaking into my earpiece, when I heard the room change. It is hard to explain. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but the energy shifted, the way it does when something significant enters. I turned. He walked in with 2 other men in dark suits, and he did not smile, did not wave, did not perform the way powerful men at charity galas usually perform. He simply moved through the room like he already owned everything in it and had simply chosen tonight to be present. Kang Hyun-woo. I knew the name. I knew. Everyone who worked in Seoul event planning at that level knew the name. Kang Group, hotels, construction, logistics. A conglomerate so vast and so deliberately opaque that journalists had stopped trying to map its full edges. What they whispered about in the corridors of the industry, the things that sat beneath the clean corporate surface, I had filed away as rumor, as gossip, as the kind of stories frightened people tell to explain why some men succeed where others don't. I was not frightened of rumors. I went back to managing my event. It was 40 minutes later when one of the catering staff spilled an entire tray of red wine directly onto the sleeve of a woman standing close to where Hyun-woo was standing. The woman shrieked. My team froze. I moved, and because that is what I do, I move. And I was there in seconds with a cloth and an apology and the practiced calm of someone who has handled 100 disasters in elegant rooms. I handled it. The woman calmed down. The moment dissolved. And then I turned and Kang Hyun-woo was watching me. Not the commotion. Me. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with these dark, still eyes, and I felt it. That particular, awful, wonderful feeling of being observed by someone who actually sees you. Not your role, not your uniform. You. I looked away first, professionally, correctly. But my hands were shaking, and I am not ashamed to admit that. He found an excuse to speak to me before the evening ended. Something small. A question about the event schedule, perfectly reasonable, the kind of thing a guest might ask the coordinator. But the way he asked it, the way he stood, close but not intrusive, quiet but completely present. His name came out of his mouth like it was nothing special. I'm Hyunwoo. No title, no family name first, just Hyunwoo. Like he was stripping away all the weight of what he was just to reach me. I told him my name. He repeated it, Zola, like he was memorizing the shape of it. Who taught you to stay so calm in a crisis? He asked. Myself, I said. He smiled, just slightly. And it undid something in me that I have never been entirely able to put back together. He called the company 3 days later and requested me specifically for his firm's next private event. My supervisor nearly fell out of her chair. I told myself it was professional. I told myself I would keep it professional. For about 3 weeks, I almost managed it. He was not what I expected up close. I had built a mental portrait, cold, transactional, the kind of power that hollows a person out. But the man I encountered in the planning meetings was different. Measured? Yes. Guarded? Absolutely. But there was a quality of attention in him that I had rarely encountered anywhere. When he asked you a question, he actually wanted the answer. When you spoke, he listened. Not the way people listen while preparing their next sentence, but with his whole focus, like your words mattered to him in a way that nothing in his empire did. I began to understand why people would follow him. I began to understand why that was dangerous. The first night we crossed the line between professional and something else entirely, we were alone in a conference room at 11 o'clock, going over the logistics for an event 3 months away. And he said, completely without warning, I would like to take you to dinner, not as a client. I want to know who you are when you are not solving other people's problems. I should have said no. I said yes. What we had over the next 4 months, I refused to call it a simple affair. It was not a fling. It was not a convenient arrangement. It was the most honest I had ever been with another human being. And I believe in the limited broken way he knew how. It was the same for him. He told me things about his life in pieces, the weight of the family name, the years he had spent becoming something he never entirely chose to be, the loneliness of authority. He told me about his marriage, arranged, civil, fundamentally hollow, and about how he had long ago accepted that intimacy was not something men in his position were permitted to have. I listened. I told him about my own life, my mother's hands, my father's voice, the country I had left to prove something to myself, the hunger that drove me that I had never fully been able to name. He looked at me like I was something he had been searching for without knowing what to call it. We were careful. Meetings in private spaces, no photographs. No public presence together. I knew what I was walking into, and I told myself I had my eyes open. I told myself I understood the terms. What I did not understand was that I had already given him everything that mattered, and that by the time I realized it, leaving would feel like cutting out part of my own chest. And I did not know, could not have known, that there was a woman watching, a woman with cold eyes and patient ambitions, who had spent years positioning herself, and who saw me as the single thing standing between her and everything she had worked for. Her name was Yena, and she was smiling even then, because she already knew how this would end. I told myself I was safe. I told myself that I was a temporary secret in a complicated man's life, and that I understood the rules of that world well enough to protect myself. But secrets have weight, and I was carrying more of one than I knew, because somewhere in those 4 months of quiet dinners and careful silences and the first honest love I had ever felt, I had stopped watching the shadows. And in his world, the shadows were always watching back. The morning I found out, I was late for a site visit. That is the detail I remember most. Not the trembling hands or the way the fluorescent light in my bathroom buzzed faintly, but the fact that I had a 9 a.m. meeting across the city and I was standing there in my robe, staring at a test I had only bought to rule it out. I had told myself I was being practical, responsible, that the tiredness and the nausea were stress-related, overwork, the particular physical cost of building a life in a foreign city with no one to lean on. 2 lines. I looked at them for a long time. Then I sat down on the floor because my legs stopped working. I did not call Hyunwoo that day, or the next. I needed to think. I needed to understand the shape of what had happened to me before I let anyone else into the room with it. I went to a clinic 3 days later. Not the one near my apartment, a different one across the city, paid in cash, a name I invented at the desk. The doctor was efficient and kind and told me everything was healthy. And then she turned the screen toward me. And I saw 2, not 1, 2. 2 heartbeats, small and fast and impossibly certain, flickering on that screen like they were already arguing with each other about who arrived first. Twins. I heard the doctor speaking, but her words were very far away. I was somewhere else entirely. I was in a future I had not planned for, counting all the ways this changed everything, all the ways this made everything I had been carefully managing completely impossible to manage anymore. Twin sons. I somehow already knew they were sons. I cannot explain that. I just knew. I need to tell you about what happened the week before I found out. Because it is important. Because it is the part that changed my calculation completely and made running feel not like cowardice, but like the only rational act left to me. I had arrived at Hyunwoo's building early for what I thought was a private planning meeting. His assistant had let me into the waiting area and stepped away. And I had heard voices from the adjacent room, not clearly, not intentionally. I was not eavesdropping. But in the particular way that sound travels in certain buildings, I heard enough. A woman's voice. Smooth, measured, controlled in the way that perfectly sharpened knives are controlled. And the words? I only caught pieces, but the pieces were enough. She was talking about me, about the African woman, about how a situation like this could not be allowed to complicate the plan, about timing, about what would happen to the organization's legitimacy if Hyunwoo continued to be publicly distracted. And then, quieter. If she becomes a problem, we handle it. You know I can arrange that quietly. I stood very still. I did not hear Hyunwoo's response. I left before the meeting began. I sent an email saying I wasn't feeling well. And I spent the rest of the night sitting in my apartment, telling myself I had misunderstood, that the words were taken out of context, that handle it quietly meant something benign in a corporate world I simply didn't fully understand. By the time I was sitting in that clinic looking at 2 flickering heartbeats on a screen, I knew I had not misunderstood anything at all. Her name was Yena. I had done enough quiet research by then to know that much. Han Yena. She had been in Hyunwoo's orbit for years. Not his wife. His wife was a quiet woman from a respected family, a marriage built on alliance and mutual obligation, a woman I had no anger toward, only a complicated sorrow. But Yena was something else, an advisor, an intimate, a woman who had made herself indispensable in the organization, in ways that existed just below what could be formally acknowledged. She had watched me arrive, and she had decided, with the calm certainty of someone who has removed obstacles before, that I needed to leave. What she did not know yet was the reason I had to leave had already multiplied. I made a list. I do that when I am frightened. I make lists because it gives my hands something purposeful to do. I listed the options. I listed the risks. I listed what I had and what I would need. Stay. Tell Hyunwoo. Trust that his feelings for me were strong enough to protect me and 2 children inside an organization where his word was law, but where Yena operated with an authority I could not fully map. Risk that his response would be controlled by loyalty to structures older than anything he felt for me. Risk that the twins would be taken. That I would be managed. That I would disappear in the way powerful organizations make inconvenient things disappear. Or run. Run before anyone knew. Run while I was still just a woman, not yet a woman carrying twin heirs to a name that entire criminal networks would want to control. Run before Yena's calculations had time to include 2 children who did not yet exist in anyone's records. I sat with that list for 4 days, and then I booked a flight. One way. Home. I told no one. I wrote no message. I left nothing behind except the key to my apartment and a resignation letter to my firm that said only that I had a family emergency and would not be returning. And in that last night in Seoul, I sat in the dark and I placed both hands on my stomach, still flat, still hiding everything. And I spoke to my sons for the first time. Not out loud. Just inside myself, the way a mother speaks to children she's already willing to die for. We are leaving, I told them, and I am going to keep you safe. Both of you. Whatever it costs me. I thought leaving was the hardest part. I thought once I was on that plane, once I was in the air and Seoul was disappearing beneath the clouds, the worst would be over. But as the plane lifted and I pressed my face to the cold window and I let myself cry, quietly, privately, the way you cry when you are already on the other side of something irreversible, I realized I had made a terrible mistake in my calculations. I had planned for everything except one thing. I had forgotten that men like Kang Hyunwoo do not simply let things go. And somewhere far below me, In a city full of glass towers and shadows, I was already being looked for. I landed in Lagos on a Tuesday morning in the middle of Harmattan season. The air hit me the moment I stepped out of the terminal, dry and dusty and warm, in a way that has no equivalent anywhere else on Earth. I had not been home in 2 years. And standing there on the pavement outside arrivals with a single carry-on bag and a body that was already beginning to change in ways I could not yet see in a mirror but could feel with every breath, I did something I had not permitted myself to do since the clinic. I cried, not quietly this time. I cried the way you cry when you have been holding something so large inside of you for so long that your body simply refuses to carry it anymore. A woman nearby, a stranger, an older woman in a bright wrapper waiting for her own family, looked at me, and without saying a word, she touched my arm. Just once, just for a second. That small kindness nearly broke me completely. I did not go to Lagos. I could not stay in the city. Too visible, too connected, too easy for someone with resources to trace.
안녕, 여러분. Before you continue, if this story touched something in you, you should know I didn't tell everything yet. The complete version has 20 full audio episodes. No interruptions, no ads. Just the story, the emotions, and the moments I couldn't fit in here. To scan the QR code on your screen, or tap the link in the pinned comment to continue listening right now.
I had a cousin, Ngozi, who lived 3 hours north of the city in a quieter town that most people from my world would not think to look for me in. We had not spoken in years, but she was family, and when I called her from the airport, she asked no questions and simply said, "Come. I will prepare the room." I did not tell her everything. I told her I had left a difficult situation in Seoul. I told her I was pregnant. I did not tell her who the father was. I did not tell her about the organization or the woman with the smooth voice who had spoken about handling problems quietly. Ngozi was wise enough not to ask more than I was ready to give. She fed me soup and made me sleep, and for the first 2 weeks in her house, I existed in a kind of suspended state. Not recovered at all, but no longer actively drowning. The pregnancy was hard. I will not pretend otherwise. My body was doing enormous work, and I was doing it without the support system, without the medical infrastructure, without the partner I had allowed myself to imagine beside me in some late-night foolish version of a future I had known was impossible. I found a good doctor in the nearest city, a woman, experienced, no nonsense, who looked at my ultrasound and confirmed what I already knew. Twin boys, healthy, growing. She looked at me over her glasses. "You are going to need support," she said. "This is not a one-woman situation." "I know," I said. But I did it alone anyway, because there was no other option I could safely choose. During those months, I thought about Hyunwoo more than I wanted to. Not the powerful man, not the name that made rooms go quiet, but the man who had once held my hand in a car on a rainy Seoul night and told me that I was the only person in years who had made him feel something he recognized as real. I thought about what he would feel if he knew. I thought about whether some part of him would want this, want them, want to know his sons existed, want to step outside the machinery of his life and choose something human. And then I remembered Yena's voice, the calculation in it, the practiced coldness of someone for whom other people's lives are variables in a formula she is always already solving. And I thought about my boys, not yet born, still growing, entirely mine in a way they would never fully be again the moment the world knew who their father was. I chose silence. Every single time, I chose silence. My sons were born in the early hours of a Friday morning in March. The hospital was small. The room was nothing like the polished Seoul hospitals I had imagined when I first thought about motherhood. But the doctor was there, and Ngozi was there, holding my hand so tightly her knuckles were pale. And after hours that felt like years, the first cry came. And then the second. 2 voices. 2 separate, distinct individual cries from 2 entirely separate people who had shared a universe inside my body for 9 months and were now announcing themselves to the world simultaneously and with absolutely no coordination. I laughed. I was crying and exhausted and completely terrified, and I laughed. Ngozi placed them on my chest, both of them, one at a time. And I looked at my sons. They were beautiful. They were undeniable. They had my skin and my nose and Hyunwoo's eyes, that particular dark, still quality that I had fallen in love with across a room full of white orchids. And in that moment, holding them both against me, I felt a love so large and so absolute that it reorganized everything inside me. I named them Kofi and Kwame. Names that were mine, that were African, that were theirs regardless of any other name they might carry. You are mine, I told them. Whatever else you are mine first. The years that followed were quiet and hard and full of small miracles. I built a life around my sons the way you build walls around a garden. Deliberately, carefully, always mindful of what was growing inside and what could harm it from outside. I found work. I built back my professional reputation remotely, then locally, then, slowly, carefully, on a broader scale. I monitored. I watched the news when Kang Group appeared in international reports. I tracked what could be tracked from a distance, careful never to let my searching create a pattern that could be detected. For 3 years, nothing. For 3 years, silence from that world. I allowed myself gradually to exhale, to believe that I had successfully become invisible, that Hyun Woo had accepted my disappearance or simply concluded I was gone for reasons he had no desire to investigate further, that Yana had gotten what she wanted, my absence, and had no reason to push further. I allowed myself to feel safe, and that was the mistake. The invitation arrived on a Thursday, a charity gala in Abuja, black tie, international guests, one of those events that circles my professional world every year without always requiring my attendance. But the client was important and the contract was significant, and I had spent 3 years rebuilding and I could not afford to say no. I told myself it would be fine. I told myself the world was large and the chances of any collision were almost nothing. I pressed my son's school pictures to my lips before I left, and I whispered, "Be good, and I love you," and I walked out the door. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that across the city, in a hotel ballroom full of glass and soft light, a woman named Yana was adjusting her necklace in a mirror. Standing at her side, tall and silent and carrying 5 years of something I had no name for in his eyes, was Kang Hyun-woo. And my sons, dressed in small suits for the first time in their lives because Ngozi had insisted, were riding with me in the back of the car, heading straight toward the moment I had spent 5 years running from. I built our life in the spaces between fear. Kofi and Kwame grew fast, the way boys do when they are loved fiercely and fed well and allowed to be loud. They filled every room they entered. They argued about everything and agreed on nothing except that they were each other's person, in a way that required no explanation. I enrolled them in the local school under my surname only. No mention of a father. When other children asked, Kofi would shrug and say our dad lives far away with the particular indifference of a child who has never been told to be ashamed of his truth, only careful with it. Kwame never answered at all. He simply looked at people until they stopped asking. He had his father's eyes. That stillness. That weight. I worked from home as much as I could. I took local contracts. I rebuilt slowly. At night, after the boys slept, I would sit at my kitchen table and feel the specific loneliness of a life that is full of love and completely empty of the one person you cannot stop thinking about. I hated myself for still thinking about him. I did it anyway. 3 years passed like that. Quietly, beautifully, dangerously close to feeling like peace. And then Ngozi said to me one morning over tea, "Zola, someone has been asking about you in the market. A man. Not from here." I set down my cup very carefully. What did he look like? She described him. Dark suit, Korean, quiet. My hands were completely still on the table. But inside, everything had already started running. I had been careful for 3 years. I had been invisible for 3 years. And it still wasn't enough. Because men like Hyun-woo do not run out of patience. They simply wait until you believe you are safe. And then they find you. I looked at my son sleeping that night, and I made a decision I had been avoiding for 3 years. No more running. If he found me, when he found me, I would stand still. I would face it. But I would face it as their mother first, and as nothing else. The ballroom went silent the moment I walked in with my sons. Not all at once. In that slow, rippling way that silence spreads through a crowd when something has shifted and no one is certain yet what it means. I felt it before I saw him. The way the air changes when something significant is present. And then I saw Yana first. She was standing near the center of the room in a white gown, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man I recognized from Hyun-woo's organization. Older, senior, the kind of face that exists in the background of every powerful photograph. She looked at me, and for one single second, her composure cracked. She saw my sons. And then I turned because I felt him before I saw him, and Kang Hyunwoo was standing 10 feet away, completely still, looking at me like I was something he had convinced himself was not real. Like a man who had practiced believing something was gone and was now confronted with the proof that it never was. His eyes moved to my sons. Kofi was holding my hand. Kwame was already looking directly at Hyunwoo with those dark, still eyes, his father's eyes, completely unafraid. The whole room was watching. Hyunwoo crossed the space between us in 6 steps. He stopped in front of me, and in a voice so low only I could hear it, he said one word, Zola. Not accusation, not anger. Something far worse, relief. I lifted my chin. Hyunwoo. He looked at my sons again. His jaw moved. How old? 3, I said. Their names are Kofi and Kwame, and they are mine. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When he opened them, something in his face had completely reorganized. Yenna was already moving toward us across the ballroom. I could see it in her walk, that precise, controlled urgency of someone whose plan is collapsing and who intends to stop it before it fully falls. But Hyunwoo turned before she reached us. He put himself between her and my sons without a single word. And the look he gave her, I had never seen that look from him before. It was a door closing, permanently. I did not know yet what came next, but I knew that whatever it would never be simple. And somewhere in the room, my sons were watching their father for the very first time without knowing that is what they were doing. We did not resolve everything that night. I want to be honest about that. Hyunwoo and I sat in a private room off the ballroom for 2 hours while a trusted member of his team quietly kept watch outside, and my sons, mercifully, fell asleep across 2 chairs pushed together with Ngozi beside them. We talked. We fought in the quiet, devastating way that people fight when they love each other and have hurt each other past the point of clean repair. He told me he had searched for me, that he had never stopped. That when I disappeared, he had understood why. That he had replayed Yenna's words, had investigated what she had said, and had removed her from every position of authority in his organization within 6 months of my disappearance. I listened. I did not apologize for running. I refused to apologize for protecting my sons. He did not ask me to. What he asked, quietly, without pressure, with the particular humility of a powerful man who has understood his own failures, was whether I would allow him to know his sons, not as a demand, as a question, as something he was not entitled to, only hoping for. I looked at him for a long time. They are the ones who decide, I said finally. When they are ready. On their terms. He nodded. Then I will wait. Things changed slowly after that, as they should, as they must, when trust has been broken at the deepest level and rebuilt from nothing with 2 small children watching every step. Yenna disappeared from his world completely. I never asked how, and I chose to believe it was simply displacement from power rather than anything darker. His marriage ended in the quiet legal way that marriages of obligation end when the obligation no longer serves either party. Hyunwoo came to see the boys for the first time on a Sunday morning 3 months later. He sat on the floor of Ngozi's living room and let Kwame examine his watch for 20 minutes in silence. Kofi asked him 17 questions in a row about airplanes and Seoul and whether it ever snowed. Hyunwoo answered every single one. I watched from the doorway. I did not know what to call what I was feeling. Not forgiveness, not entirely, not yet, not love, though it had never fully left. Something between them. Something that required more time and more honesty than we had yet given each other. Something worth trying for. We are not a perfect family. We may never be. But we are a real one.
If you made it to the end, you already understand this isn't just another story. What you watched here is only a fragment. The full experience lives in 20 complete audio episodes, carefully told, with every detail, every emotion, every turning point. There are no ads, no interruptions, and nothing was removed like it is on YouTube. You can listen anytime on your phone with total privacy, inside the members-only area. Scan the QR code on your screen now, or tap the link in the pinned comment.
Complicated and scarred and stubbornly, quietly alive. And my sons, my Kofi, my Kwame, they know who they are. They carry both worlds in their faces and neither one as a burden. I made sure of that. From the very first night I held them in that small hospital room, I made sure of that. But peace, I have learned, is never permanent when the name you carry belongs to an empire. 3 weeks after Hyunwoo's first visit, a letter arrived at my door. No return address. Embossed with a seal I did not recognize, but that Hyunwoo went very pale looking at. He folded it carefully and said nothing for a long time. And then he looked at my sons playing in the garden and said, "There are people in my world who know about the boys now. People I cannot simply displace." I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer right away. He just put his hand over mine and held it there with the particular weight of a man who is trying to protect something he is afraid he has already put in danger. And I felt it again. That old familiar cold, settling back into my chest like it never truly left. I used to think surviving was enough. I used to think that if I kept my boys safe and kept breathing and kept building, that would be the whole story. The end, the reward. But the truth is that some wounds don't close just because the bleeding stops. I still wake up some nights reaching for a peace that hasn't fully arrived yet. I still look at my son's eyes and feel something that is equal parts love and grief, because they remind me of everything I chose and everything I lost, and everything I am still not sure I have the right to want. Hyunwoo and I, we are trying. That is the most honest thing I can say. We are two broken people trying to build something whole for two boys who deserve better than the broken pieces we started with. Some days I believe we can. Some days I'm not sure. But here is what I keep coming back to. Was I right to run? Or did I steal something from my sons that I will spend the rest of my life trying to give back? And if you were me carrying those 2 heartbeats alone in a foreign country with a woman's threat still ringing in your ears, would you have done the same?